everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you are doing well. We're continuing with the Lost series today and I'm so excited. I'm so excited as usual, but I'm especially excited today because we're doing it. We're talking about my personal favourite character of the show. I love everybody, but if I had to pick a favourite, my favourite is Sawyer. Where do I even begin? The love of my life. I mean, there are no words to describe how much I love Sawyer and how much I did love Sawyer. So I'm gonna get embarrassed talking about this, and I promise we will get to the therapeutic stuff in a moment. This isn't just gonna be an hour of me thirsting, but he was one of my earliest ever crushes. As I mentioned in my Jack video and my Kate video, by the way, if you've just stumbled across this video, definitely check out. I've done a whole video on Jack Shepherd and a whole video on Kate Austen, and now we're doing Sawyer. Not doing Sawyer when I'm about to talk about how hot he is. I started watching Lost when I was about 14 years old, roughly, like perhaps 13, can't remember. So to be that age and to watch a TV show that has a man like Sawyer in, did all kinds of confusing things to hormonal teenage Katie. Absolutely obsessed with him, and I think everybody loves Sawyer. I've got lots of friends and family members who also love Lost, and Sawyer tends to be a name that comes up when people are talking about their favourite characters. So I am so excited to get into this video today. I don't want to waste any more time, especially talking about how hot he is and how much I used to fancy him. We want to get deep. We want to talk about Sawyer as a character, what he would be like as a client, how he changed as a person throughout the show, how I would help him if he was a client. We're going to be looking at childhood, his flashbacks on the island, etc. If you like this video, please give me a like. Please subscribe to my channel for not only future Lost videos, but also just other videos around mental health as well. It really helps me out. Please follow me on Instagram as well. I post a lot over there, supporting you with accessing therapy, how to get the most out of therapy, and the kind of things to look out for when trying to find a therapist. So definitely check out my Instagram page. I don't want to waste any more time on this intro. I've already been blabbering on as usual. Let's talk about James Ford, aka Sawyer. So first of all, how do I think Sawyer would present as a client in therapy? So the reason I'm laughing is because, can you actually imagine? When I think about this question with all the characters, I'm thinking kind of season 1, because obviously the point of the show is the character development that they go on. They go on a massive journey through meeting each other, through their experience on the island over the 6 seasons. I don't want to approach this question from like a season 6 Sawyer. I'm going to think season 1. It would be a nightmare. No, all clients are obviously welcome. The reason why I'm sort of making jokes is because getting Sawyer to open up would be really challenging, let's face it. He is very connection avoidant. He pushes everybody around him away. He does not want to care for people, and he really doesn't want people to care about him. In fact, quite the opposite. He wants people to actively dislike him. So I can't imagine him finding connection with a therapist really easy. I think I would get a nickname. I think I would get... It's going to sound like wishful thinking, but I genuinely think I'd get like flirty comments, and that is more based on people. If my friends are watching this, they'll be like, Katie, wish. That is genuinely more based on his character, as in the way he talks to women in season 1 is massively flirtatious with all of them as well. It's because he's not taking anything seriously. It's actually quite like misogynistic, the comments that he makes as well as obviously he's quite racist and uses just offensive language all the time. So it would be very tricky. I'd have to put in strict boundaries of appropriate language, appropriate behaviour, really put a lot in the contract about what therapy is, what we're here to do. We're not here to just have a back and forth and play games with each other. It's a space for him to open up and talk about things and process his feelings. That might sound really sort of strict and quite direct, and I would never normally approach clients like that unless I absolutely have to. I'm talking because I'm thinking of Sawyer. I'm thinking of somebody with that season 1 personality that might try and make the sessions incredibly difficult for me, as well as obviously being determined not to get anything out of it. So I think he'd be incredibly standoffish. He would be very avoidant. He would make jokes. He would distract me. I also think he would kind of shut down with me as well. We see throughout the show, but obviously more so the early seasons, when somebody, particularly Kate, is able to see a bit more in him, touch a bit of a nerve, get a bit more of an emotional connection, we see him sometimes switch to anger, but also just completely shut down and not really say anything, like go very silent in a way. So I would expect some of that as well. Something else that I might expect to see as we would progress throughout the session. So if I was able to connect with him in some way, perhaps speak his language a bit, it would be primarily through books, I would think. So the really interesting thing about Sawyer is he's a massive reader, and actually sometimes the way he describes what's happening around him, but also about himself, is through quotes of books. He obviously uses nicknames from books as well, which there's definitely a lot of insight there. Of Mice and Men comes to mind, where if you've read that book, there's a lot of references around loneliness, around companionship, obviously between the two main characters in that book, and being male as well. A lot about like males' mental health and the perception of men and things like that. I can't really remember the book really well. I read it for GCSE, so it's a long time ago now for me. It's a fantastic book, and you get insight into Sawyer through his quote that he uses. But this happens throughout the show. So part of me would expect to kind of have to do a lot of Googling. Like he might make references to different books that he's read or the book that he's currently reading or particular characters. And I would have to go away and kind of, if I haven't read it, do a bit of like a search to gain a bit more understanding of him. So that's just something else that I wanted to add around, that's a bit more positive, I guess, or a bit more interesting around how I would expect Sawyer to present in the therapy room. So now we're going to go into content. So if Sawyer was fully committed to therapy, what is his story? What would come up? What are some kind of really significant things to explore? So naturally, I'm going to start with childhood. And Sawyer's childhood, I feel like all the characters in Lost don't really have like an amazing childhood necessarily. It definitely varies, but I don't know, there's a lot coming to mind that's quite negative that people experienced. And Sawyer's is probably the worst, or certainly up there with one of the worst childhoods in terms of what happens to him. So obviously this video is going to be full of spoilers in case you hadn't already guessed. When Sawyer was 8 years old, his mum had an affair with a con man called Mr Sawyer. It's an alias. Then that con man took all their money because it was, he's probably seduced her. The reason we know this is because we see Sawyer do it as an adult, which obviously I'll get to. Mr Sawyer probably seduced his mum. She probably wanted to leave Sawyer's dad, or James's dad, maybe that would make it a bit easier to follow. And then it all goes wrong basically. He takes all the money, he completely tricks both of them. The dad goes into an absolute fit of rage, and we see very tragically Sawyer's mum hide him under the bed because she can sort of hear him coming. We can hear banging on the door. We can hear him shouting like, let me in, let me in. And she says, don't come out no matter what you hear, no matter what you see. And then we hear the confrontation, and it's incredibly, incredibly like harrowing and tragic because he shoots his wife, he kills Sawyer's mum, and then kills himself as well. And this is all witnessed and heard by an 8-year-old child. So the impact of what that can do to somebody, there aren't really any words to describe how traumatic that would be for a child to witness. It's also incredibly violent. We really should be protecting children from witnessing violence like that. It's losing both your parents at once. So that amount of grief as a child, your whole world is completely shattered, and having to reconcile the fact that, well, he doesn't reconcile this, but that his dad commits the crime. What's really interesting about Sawyer is that's not how he sees it. He completely blames Mr Sawyer, the original con man. And that's really interesting because when something like that happens, people often need someone to blame. Especially as a child, you need a very simplistic person to blame. And when you love your mum and dad, you're not going to blame them. You're not going to think, well, my mum had an affair, my dad's the one that's literally committed murder and ended both of their lives. You see it as almost very sort of Disney villain, TV show villain. It's this other person that came in and destroyed my family, which is completely valid. Like, that con man did destroy that person's family. I guess the reason I'm talking about this is that Sawyer's perspective doesn't change with age either. There is no shifting the blame to parents, or at least to his dad, for the crime that he committed. It is all hyper-focused on this con man that took his parents away. So that's what I wanted to start off talking about, obviously, because that really just sets Sawyer's whole life in motion. The Sawyer that we meet in season 1 and see throughout the show is almost like, I would say, created that day. You get glimmers of the innocence of Sawyer and who he probably was before that day happened. Like, being 8 years old, you've barely even like developed yet. You're not a teenager yet, never mind an adult. And so it really did form his psyche that day. And it was such a traumatic event. Something else to note is that I imagine following the death of his parents, it was quite a lonely existence, and loneliness is quite a big theme for Sawyer that we see throughout flashbacks and on the show as well. So as far as I'm aware, Sawyer moves in with another family member at the age of 8. So he's not like lonely, I guess, but we don't know the relationship that he has with the new family members or anything like that. And I don't think he's there for very long. I think, you know, as soon as he's like 18 or whatever, he leaves. I can't 100% remember the details around that. Maybe we're not aware of all the details, but certainly it seems like quite a lonely childhood, a lonely existence, and then that leads to quite a lonely adulthood as well. It seems like his parents were his close people, and 8 years old is like the age where you do have friends, obviously, but it's more when you get a bit older that you start to make like close friends that are a bit more long term. When you're 8, it's kind of like who you sit next to at school, that kind of thing. And so his 2 closest people, I imagine, were his parents, and he lost them, and then probably struggled to form connections ever since. So we don't know of any friends that he had. It just seems like he was incredibly isolated and quite focused on revenge then. So I want to definitely talk about the concept of revenge, because again, that is a gigantic theme with Sawyer. It becomes his whole life. It becomes his whole identity. So at the funeral of his mum and dad, we see adorable little Sawyer write the infamous letter to Mr Sawyer. I keep forgetting to call him James, because to me he's Sawyer, you know, so I do apologise. You'll hear me say James every now and then, but I probably will just use Sawyer. But so we see little James writing this letter to Mr Sawyer. We encourage letter writing in therapy all the time. I think what's interesting is that he does it on his own accord, and it also contains violence. I mean, obviously people must have spoken in front of him about what happened. I mean, I know he witnessed the crime, so he knows that his dad shot his mum and then obviously killed himself. So I know that he knows that, but in the letter he describes like the details of like, you slept with my mother and you took all our money away. And part of me is a bit tragic and potentially unavoidable that he was aware of those details. For a child to find out those details, not only is that quite traumatic in itself to know that information, but it's building up that sense of like needing to get revenge and anger as well, or rage in this case. So as a young boy, he's getting filled with rage, and instead of just getting it out of his system by writing a letter, he holds on to that letter. It does make me question the people around him. Like, in real life, a child like Sawyer would have to go to therapy. Not have to, actually, I shouldn't say that, but it would be like very strongly encouraged after what he's been through. I wonder if he disclosed this letter to anybody. It's probably not. It seems like it's quite like a secretive thing. It's a shame that no family member discovered it and helped him work through his anger, because basically, once again, him holding on to this letter and being quite violent in the letter of like, I will find you and I will kill you and I will give you this letter. No one ever addresses it. So he's just this kid that writes that, holds on to it, and it's a promise that he then feels like he has to keep forever, because there's no one showing him another way. So I just wanted to touch on that as well, obviously, because revenge and that focus on revenge really sets the whole course for who he is and his whole path and all the decisions that he makes as well. So I want to talk about the other flashbacks then. Obviously I focused quite a lot on childhood, but what else would we need to explore with some of the rest of Sawyer's history? So obviously the really fascinating thing is that he becomes the man he hates. It's completely fascinating. I understand that he probably started off having to do his like research of like who this person is and really get into that world of conning, that world of, you know, like bad people, crime, going to particular areas, following in his footsteps to like see where he might be going next, what moves he makes. But I think the really unfortunate thing that happens is that Sawyer loses his complete identity. He kind of lost it when he was 8 years old, but then through this like, I need to find him, I need to find him, I need to get revenge, I need to give him this letter. There is no pre-8-year-old Sawyer left, really. I mean, there obviously is like deep down, but he really embodies the person that he's looking for. I think the other unfortunate thing is he's good at it as well. So Sawyer is very charming, very good looking, as we've already mentioned. He's really good with women. He's really likable. He's able to be funny, charming, as I've said, charismatic, smart, quick wit, very good then at conning people because he sort of knows what he's talking about and he can get the girl on side, he can sort of just about get the guy on side. He's also then able to charm these other criminals, these other con men, and be very much immersed in this world. What that leads to though is a insurmountable amount of self-loathing. This is probably the biggest thing with Sawyer's character on the island. That is the barrier for him to connect with everyone else, and a barrier to his journey at first is the amount of self-hatred that he has. He hates himself so much that he goes out of his way to hurt others to prevent them from forming a genuine connection with him. He goes out of his way to be a bad person because he sees that as who he is and he deserves the reaction that gets. And he's very reckless. He does reckless things because there's no regard for himself. He doesn't really care about what happens to him. Something else that happens that's obviously extremely significant, and we do get a glimpse in this flashback of the Sawyer that we obviously watching the show know is in there. He isn't all bad, he does care really. There's like a part of his heart that is like slightly open or wants to be open. That kind of pre-8-year-old self is coming out, and that's when he finds out that he's had a child. And I think the acting in this scene is really interesting because obviously he's incredibly angry with Cassidy for even mentioning the idea that he might have a baby. He's like, that kid isn't mine. What's really interesting is you can tell that he doesn't mean that in a way of literally, it's not mine, get a DNA test, that kind of thing. He means it in like, I don't have a child, I'm not a dad, like I'm not doing this. Very much shut down, this isn't happening, you will not tap into my heart. And I think kids are a bit of a soft spot for him. We see that on the island and off the island, where because of what happened to him as a child, it is his little weakness. We see in the first ever flashback with Sawyer actually that when he realizes that the couple that he's conning has a child similar age to him, he calls the whole thing off and walks out. We see with Clementine that flicker of emotion in his face. He gives Cassidy all the anger, but then when he walks off, he looks like he's on the verge of tears, probably just because of guilt, being her dad and not being able to be the person that he, you know, wants to be. We see he's quite soft on the island towards Aaron and towards Walt as well. He cares about Walt despite resisting, and he cares about Aaron and bonds with the baby. So yeah, kids is his little weakness, and it's really lovely actually because his inner child that was so traumatized is probably able to connect with children in some way. And it's a shame we don't see more of that, but I definitely notice flickers of that throughout the show. Another reason why he rejects Clementine or rejects the idea of being a father is the big thing about Sawyer is that he doesn't think that he's worthy of love at all. So he rejects love, and of course becoming a dad and having a child, there's this element of unconditional like love there and care there, so he completely rejects that. Also Cassidy quite clearly cares about Sawyer as well, and so there's a rejection of her. I guess it's a rejection of family. He does not believe he deserves family, deserves love, so then it's completely rejected, and of course we see him reject it on the show as well at the beginning. And then the final flashback that I want to talk about then is kind of what brings him to Australia, and something else that could come up in therapy, which is the guilt that he feels for killing the wrong man. So in Australia, he's conned basically by another person who wants a particular person killed, and he lies and says that it's the person you've been looking for, it's the real Mr Sawyer. So he goes and reads out the letter and shoots him, and you can tell how devastated he is when he realizes it's the wrong person, and having to live with that. We kind of see that on the island, especially through his relationship with Kate, and that episode where he's getting chased by the boar. That episode's an amazing Sawyer episode because we're seeing him wrestle with all the different parts of himself, the part of him that like doesn't care and just and will do it again and just wants it done and out and full of rage and anger. But then we see him put the gun down and he doesn't actually want to hurt the animal, and that's the side of him that is remorseful. That's the side of him that regrets it. That's the side of him that does understand right from wrong and doesn't think that innocent people deserve to die. Even though there is a massively violent side to Sawyer, there is that part of him that isn't just completely black and white about it and just doesn't care at all. He doesn't think that certain people deserve to die. That's obviously a significant thing that would quite likely come up in the sessions as well. So moving on, we've spoken about childhood, we've spoken about flashbacks. Let's talk about his island journey then. So as I mentioned, when we meet Sawyer in season 1, it's not good, especially, the show's quite old now, but Sawyer with hindsight, if you rewatch it in season 1, is like really racist and Islamophobic towards Sayid. He's really horrible towards Hurley. He's obviously horrible to Jack. He's quite sexist towards like Sun, Shannon, Kate. He's funny, but he's horrible. Like there's no defending like the language that comes out of his mouth. Like he's not a good person at all. He's also just a troublemaker, getting into fights, getting involved with things that don't concern him, but not in a helpful way. Like they're all trying to survive and get organised, and he's always got like opinions and trying to wind people up and trying to play people off each other, and quite violent and quite aggressive and just a nuisance really. And of course this is the Sawyer that's just come off killing the wrong person and is full of self-hatred, and so he's alienating himself. He, a bit like Kate, I spoke about this in my Kate video, is going to really struggle being trapped in a place with the same people. This is where both of them have this massively in common. They don't do well with having to form more long-term connections, even if it is just to survive. It doesn't have to be friends or like romance, but just connection to survive. Sawyer doesn't do that at all in his life. He is a lone wolf out there lying to people, and that's a big part of why he doesn't learn anyone's names. He just gives everybody nicknames because it's part of his, part of being rude and offensive, and second of all, it's because why would he bother to learn anyone's names? Like, what would be the point of that? Because even someone's name is quite personal, and you're learning something about someone, and he doesn't care to do that. So that's kind of where we meet Sawyer. Something significant that happens in season 1 is that he allows himself to be tortured. He lies and pretends that he has Shannon's like asthma medication because he's got like a stash of stuff that he collects. He's quite good at like hoarding and finding things. He's very resourceful as an individual. Doesn't share though, doesn't, help everybody out. There's a misunderstanding where Boone thinks that he's got Shannon's medication because he has other medication. Sawyer beats him up and says that he does have it, but that he's not going to give it. This goes on and on and on. This episode is actually wild because it goes on and on and on with everybody trying different things. Kate kisses him, so he kind of like gets a kiss out of it from Kate, which is, quite dark actually when you think about it, and allows himself to be tortured by Sayid, not condoning their decision to do that to Sawyer. Obviously we'll get to Sayid's character in that video, but what's fascinating is that he lets it get that far when he doesn't have it. All he has to say is that he doesn't have it, or give it if he did have it, but what's more shocking is that he doesn't have it. And this really is quite scary in terms of realizing how much he wants people to hate him. This is like the first time where you really get that message loud and clear. This man hates himself so much that he's willing to go through excruciating pain, be beaten up, have everyone hate him. Kate punches him. He does quite like Kate, but he's more than happy to sabotage that potential connection, all because he gets something out of it. It's like a self-harm in a way. It's like a roundabout self-harm where you're getting other people to harm you. You're pushing them to the point where they harm you. But it's basically self-harm in terms of he must get something out of it. He must get some sort of release maybe, or just feels like he deserves the punishment. It's a release of pain. And I would say it's probably because he thinks he deserves it. It's quite satisfying in a way because he's getting the punishment that he believes on some level that he deserves because he hates himself so much. So that episode is a massively significant Sawyer moment. Something else I want to touch on, because I obviously spoke about it in the video of Jack, which is my favourite lost scene of all time, which is at the end of season 1 when Sawyer does something good for Jack. So the reason I want to talk about this is because I sort of mentioned this before, but we see glimmers of good with Sawyer throughout, and that's what makes him such a good character. Otherwise you would just hate him. He would just not be redeemable. He'd be like the villain of the show. The reason why people love Sawyer is not only, you know, funny, charismatic, the performance of Josh Holloway, but he's not all bad, and you see him do small things, or there's small moments, even just in this facial expression, you're like, he cares. He actually does care. And for me, one of the most significant ones is in Exodus, the season 1 finale, with his biggest rival, the guy that he can't really stand, but low-key respects at the same time, is Jack. And he held on to this for a while. He realised that he'd met Jack's dad at some point in season 1 because they'd had a conversation, and he was like, oh, he kind of put the dots together that he'd had this conversation with Jack's dad, and he decides, especially as he's leaving, he's going on the raft, to tell him the story and do something for Jack that, it's gonna make me emotional, that he sort of can tell is going to do something for him that's really significant. And then of course he sees it, Jack gets very emotional, and he keeps going. What I love about this scene, and like, it's just one of the reasons I love Sawyer so much, is that based on what I've said about Sawyer so far, you'd think that the moment Jack sort of showed any emotion, he'd be like, yes, I just wanted to let you know that, and like almost like shut it down. But he actually keeps telling the story, and actually goes very far with, he said he loved you, he said this, he said that, he forgives him, etc. So he really does Jack a good solid with that. And I just think it's beautiful. I think it's obviously beautiful for Jack's story as well, but it's really significant in terms of the good that's in Sawyer, because he didn't have to share that, but of course it was the lovely right thing to do. And it's bonding as well, which for Sawyer is a big deal, especially with Jack. So they wish each other good luck, and then he goes on the raft. And something that you find out with Sawyer going on the raft is why. Michael says, I love the way Michael phrases this of like, oh, I've been trying to figure this out since the moment you wanted on this raft. Guy that doesn't care about anybody but himself. Why would he want to risk his life? Because the raft is, I mean, it's an amazing build, but it's very dangerous. You're going out to sea, trying to find a boat, trying to find rescue. Why would he do that? And then he says, you're either a hero or you want to die. And Sawyer says, well, I ain't no hero, Mike. Oh, got punched. What a line. What a line. Again, we've already seen this with the torture, with the other things that have happened in season 1, but you really then realise how tragic Sawyer's character is. He doesn't care what happens to him, so he's willing to put himself in these life-threatening situations. Part of him hopes, actually, that that the worst case scenario happens. He doesn't really want that for the other people on the raft, and that's kind of Sawyer's downfall, is that like he does this with the intent of kind of harming himself, but actually when the worst case does happen, he saves Michael's life. He never gets over Walt being taken. He looks out for Jin. It's not that he really wants it literally, he just wants it for himself. He doesn't care really what happens to him. And it's also not as literal as that either. Like, we do see Sawyer fight somewhat for his life. He goes back and forth. We see in season 3 when he's got a gun to his head, Kate's like, you fight, you better fight, and he does give up. But again, that's more for Kate. For Kate's sake, he's worried that Kate's gonna die. So it's not that he wants to die in the literal sense of like he's suicidal. It's more that he's just reckless. He just doesn't care what happens to him. And we see that a lot in therapy of people that aren't necessarily actively doing anything to end their life or experiencing suicidal thoughts like necessarily. It's more that they just don't care. They're just like, I'm just going to do this because whatever. And it's rooted in self-hatred or self-loathing or just, no regard for their own life. So it's another significant thing that happens with Sawyer. Another thing that I want to talk about is the moment in season 2 when he cons everybody for the guns. This is, the way it's written is amazing, because what we see happen is that Sawyer starts to get close to people. He is a bit of a hero after what happens with the raft. He saved Michael's life. We brought Jin back to Sun. Everybody, admires him, and he's starting to get on with everybody a lot better. He's also getting a lot closer to Kate. They're definitely forming more of a stronger connection. This leads to Sawyer basically freaking out. We don't see him freak out, but this is just like a big fat no. This cannot happen. This is the worst case scenario. I'm starting to care about people. People are starting to care about me. Completely wants to reject it. Does not want that at all, because he's still not like fully evolved. Obviously, as he says, a leopard doesn't change his stripes. Leopard doesn't change his spots. I can't remember if it's stripes or spots. That's terrible. But people don't change, and he doesn't want to change either. Or maybe it's just too hard. It's too hard, the thought of fully changing and letting people in and feeling care for others. So he cons everybody, he takes all the guns, and it really has nothing to do with guns. As Kate says to him, I don't think this has anything to do with guns. I think you want people to hate you. I would also add to that and say it's about power. There's this thing with Sawyer that he wants, the reason why he can't stand Jack is because Jack's the leader, people go to him, and even though Jack is cared about and has to form connections with everybody in order to be that role, Sawyer doesn't want that, but he almost wants like the power that Jack has. So the fact that people go to him for medication, go to him for guns, it is just power that he's searching for. He's had quite a powerless life. Certainly when he was younger, he had no power over that situation whatsoever. So now he's kind of reclaiming it. I would also say as well that it's about attention. They don't really go there with the show, but I think Sawyer, people that tend to not, I don't want to say people and generalize, but Sawyer strikes me as somebody who doesn't want like a closeness of anybody. He doesn't want love. He doesn't want friendship. He doesn't want to feel those things or have them be demonstrated towards him. But he's incredibly lonely. He's incredibly lonely. And he carries the weight of that loneliness all the time. Having people have to come up to him and chat to him in a way that's so boundaried, in a way that's just about guns, or like, I need a pregnancy test, or I need tablets, or I need whatever it is, that would do for him. It's a way for him to like have his little moment with somebody and then send them on their way. So I think Kate is completely right with what she said, but I would also add other things to it as well. It's about the self-hatred and loneliness and pain, and there's a lot going on with why he did that. And obviously, speaking of Kate, it's a really interesting love story between Kate and Sawyer, because obviously they have loads in common. I spoke about this in the Kate video, but they really do connect with that shared history, that shared pain, shared crime, shared view of violence or experience of violence. And you can tell that Sawyer likes Kate because he relates to her. He really resonates with her experiences, the stuff that he does know about Kate, what he sees in Kate, when she is holding a gun or just doing something. You can tell he watches her and is like, I get who she is, because he feels that connection. But the problem Sawyer and Kate have, I'll speak obviously more from Sawyer's perspective, is that it's a constant back and forth, because it's a constant, I like you, I'm attracted to you, I really care about you, maybe even love you, to I completely reject you, I completely reject this, I completely reject this connection, and it's just back and forth too much. So that's kind of the difficulty with their bond. But I think their connection is extremely important for both characters in terms of their evolution and being seen and being understood. Without each other, I don't know how far the character development would have gone, because it's hard to be faced with loads of people that don't relate to you at all. There's obviously lots to be learnt through that, but really you need someone that speaks your language, and Kate and Sawyer speak each other's language. A massive thing that I want to talk about is obviously the confrontation with the real Mr Sawyer, aka Locke's dad. So this was such a gag when I watched it live. Obviously, if you were a nerd like me, you would be online all the time on forums talking about Lost. Like, so I already knew, or had like a very strong sense, that Locke's dad, the con man, was going to also be the real Sawyer, but it wasn't explicitly shown until season 3. And obviously he's on the island and there's a confrontation. Now, I have got so many thoughts about this. I would love to know in the comments what people think about how they did this, because I feel a little bit differently now to how I felt when I watched this at the time. And this could be an age thing, I don't know. Really want to know what you think. But basically, at the time, I'll say that first, I was like, yes. Like, as a teenager watching the show, I was like, oh my God, yes, good. You know, I loved Sawyer as my favorite character, and he's finally getting to confront the person that ruined his life. And also this character is someone that you hated as well for what he did to Locke. And just like, he's just evil. Like, he's just evil. With any TV show, when there's an evil character, it's not that you condone violence or condone murder or anything, but there's obviously a bit of satisfaction when something like this happens. So that was kind of my take at the time, just very simplistic of like, yeah, you go Sawyer, he got what he wanted. Now, and also my therapeutic take obviously is a bit different. And I do wonder if this actually set Sawyer's character development back a bit, because at this point we're seeing loads of progress with Sawyer. He's definitely making friends. He's friends with Jin, he's friends with Hurley, he's closer to Kate. They actually have started being intimate together in season 3. It's not to say it's all rainbows and sunshine, but there's definitely been evolution with Sawyer at this point. And I don't know, I would say, this is obviously forgetting it's a TV show, this is talking about it as if it's real, that him actually acting out what he set out in that letter years ago, I don't know how like cathartic that would actually be. I mean, first of all, it's a crime. First of all, it's killing in cold blood. The guy was also chained up, so it wasn't like a fight. I mean, I know that Locke locked him in the brig, so he couldn't get out. I was about to say he didn't have a choice. That's not quite true, but it was a bit of a unique situation. I don't know, I just think it's incredibly violent, and the whole point of Sawyer's character development is he's gone from very violent, he killed the wrong person in Australia, that was a mistake that he regretted. He picked this path of revenge, of self-hatred, of becoming a bad person. And on the island, what it was supposed to be was choosing a different path. I'm letting go. A lot of what Lost is about is letting go. And so to let go surely would be to rip up the letter himself, or I don't know, get something out of the situation more verbally rather than violently. I don't know. I really don't know. There's part of me, even as I'm saying this, I'm like, what do I really think? Because that wouldn't have made good TV. But I guess talking strictly as a person and a therapist, I do think it's wrong that Sawyer did that. You know, I don't think, despite how horrible the character is, that is the right way. And I think it makes the letter come true, which I don't think should have been the point of the letter. And if there was a real person in real life who wrote that letter as a kid and needed to hand it to someone and set out to kill someone, they would need psychiatric help to get them to a different way of thinking. So to see him, I don't know, to see him act this out, I'm not sure. Please let me know what you think about that, whether you think it was really well written, it was needed for his character development, because I guess what we see him go through quite a low, actually. He sort of disconnects from Kate after that. He's very quiet as well. She's even like, what's going on with you? You've been acting really weird. So I don't know if what it does for Sawyer. I think what's really sad is, yes, I guess long term it helps him let go because that is the end of that story. But then when you've been holding on to something for that long and it actually comes true and it's over, what do you have left? So I think what happens is he has a complete identity crisis and he's like depressed. I would go as far as saying Sawyer, the Sawyer that we see after he commits that murder, is a depressed Sawyer because his world once again has crumbled, because that's what he wanted to do his whole life. That's what his whole life's purpose was for. He's done it now. Doesn't feel good about it, let's face it, because he even throws up afterwards and says, why did you do this to me? Yeah, he feels guilty probably as well. It didn't bring him any kind of like, oh, thank God, you know, I'm so glad I've done that, nothing to worry about ever again. That's a question mark for me, but obviously massively, massively significant in Sawyer's story. Something else then, moving on to more like season 4, is that Sawyer doesn't want to leave the island. He picks Locke to stay. There's kind of the Jack versus Locke situation, and he just focuses on survival and picks Locke. I also think this is Sawyer recognizing that he doesn't have anything to go back to. His whole life was conning people and looking for the real Mr Sawyer. That's done. He doesn't have anything. He does not have anything to go back to, except maybe Cassidy and his child. But obviously he's rejected the idea of that and doesn't think that he is worthy of that. So for him, it's like, what the hell would I do back home? There is nothing for him there. And whilst a lot of the characters are really in season 4 focused on rescue, Sawyer is not one of those people. He's more ready to actually like settle down on the island and kind of accept that life is at least a life there. So that's really interesting and definitely part of his like evolution, that kind of building his identity again, but he's building his identity on the island because he's not had an identity off the island. Obviously with that comes what happens at the end of season 4, which is he jumps out of the helicopter. He sort of ends up on the helicopter by accident anyway, just with how the season plays out. Certain characters are all kind of pulled together, pulled in different directions. There's a lot of chaos. So I don't think he really gets on the helicopter with a lot of intention anyway. And then when he realizes that it's gonna crash if the weight doesn't change, I feel like he's more than happy actually to sacrifice himself and jump off. But he says to Kate, you know, find my daughter and tell her that I'm sorry, which, wow, the character development, because he's acknowledging that he has a daughter, it shows that he has been thinking of her. So he's accessing those thoughts, probably for the first time in a long time. And he clearly wants some sort of relationship. And by relationship, that can mean anything. It can be just acknowledgement or through Kate. Kate obviously knows Sawyer really well. So what better person to kind of talk about what her dad's like, bond with Cassidy. Turns out they already know each other because it's lost, obviously. He, in a very quick few seconds, shows a lot of intent with that situation around like, I need you to do this for me. And it's incredibly personal as well, which is not like Sawyer at all to go so personal. He sacrifices himself, which is obviously an incredibly brave, good thing to do as well. And I don't want to take away from that. It's just definitely as well because he doesn't have anything to go back to. Like the real world is not for him. So he's more than happy to be like, these people deserve it and I'm gonna jump off. So yeah, very, very emotional moment. And then that leads us to the final couple of seasons then. So speaking of Sawyer and building his identity, he kind of becomes the leader. Jack's off the island and lots of people are off the island. Locke also leaves as well. And so Sawyer does become the leader. They look to him. They look to him and kind of Juliet as well. They really do look to him and his sort of in this new role. It's really lovely to see that in season 5 and how he sort of, in his way, he's still Sawyer, but he like, I don't know, he kind of brings people together. And then this is the beginning of Sawyer's connection with Juliet. In another really significant moment, he asks Juliet to stay. She wants to leave. He says, can I just have 2 more weeks? And it's because he doesn't want, he admits later on, it's because he doesn't want to be alone. That is massive. Sawyer, the Sawyer that we've seen throughout the entire show, only wants to be alone. He's been forced to not be alone. He's on this island, he's in these situations where he is making connections with people, he's on the raft with people, he's with the others, with people. But it's all not through choice, really. He's on a campsite and, you know, he can't really be that isolated. So this is massive that he's like, what about me? You know, please don't go. Please don't leave me. Yeah, that's a big deal, not just in terms of their relationship, obviously, but a big deal for Sawyer to care. He actually cares about himself. That is showing a bit of care towards himself of like, oh, you're really going to leave me here in this situation with these people? Like, I need you. That's massive. And then, of course, we see him really lean into this new Sawyer, and we don't get to see it unfortunately. But what we find out is over the course of 3 years, those glimmers of not wanting to be alone, his connection with Juliet, being a leader, becomes fully formed, and he is so respected by the Dharma people. People look to him. He is looked up to. You know, he is a bit of a leader in that situation. He's like head of security, I believe, which is a massive role in that kind of group, in that kind of situation. He's like a manager. People call him boss. He is in a steady relationship with Juliet where they're actually in love and they have a house and it's quite settled. So he's quite literally not alone. And not only not alone, but actually accepting people in. He's got friends, he's got colleagues, he's got peers, and he's got like a long-term partner. That is, when you think about the Sawyer that I was describing at the start of this video, is wild. Like, it is wild how that has happened. But what's amazing about the show is you do kind of see it gradually start to, you see the glimmers, and then of course over those 3 years, it's obviously become fully formed. And what's beautiful is this, to me, is the life that Sawyer always wanted. I think if Sawyer hadn't gone through what happened to him at 8 years old, this is who the real Sawyer wants to be. He wants to be just a normal guy, still have the same personality, but somebody that has like a good job, a job that is very practical, that's very well respected. He wants to be in love, he wants to be loved, he wants to be settled. And what's amazing to see in season 5 is that he's accepted himself. He's not rejecting anything or anyone. He's not rejecting himself. He's very secure in who he is, and you can tell he loves it. He's really happy, and that's why it all becomes very tragic. What happens next? Oh God, we have to get into it. So very tragically, after giving Sawyer all of this, Juliet dies. And so we are seeing more grief from Sawyer, and it does unlock old Sawyer patterns. He's still fully evolved, developed, but naturally losing someone that you love, your partner, it reopens old wounds. He pushes everybody away again. He's full of rage. He beats the crap out of Jack. He becomes more violent, more angry. You know, Kate follows him and he asks her to leave. And there's this really tragic scene where he says to her, I was going to ask Juliet to marry me, but I believe that some people are meant to be alone. And it makes me a bit choked up actually, because it's really sad. It's really sad. It's sad anyway, because obviously Juliet's died, which is really tragic in itself. And Juliet's another one of my favourite characters. It's objectively sad, but I think what's really sad is that he must have started to believe that he did deserve happiness and to not be alone after his whole life believing he needs to be alone and that he should be alone, deserves to be alone. Juliet and that whole experience with Dharma must have swayed him in a direction of like, actually, maybe this is the life for me that I was meant to have all along. And then her death reminds him of that not being true. And actually, it feels like it's punishment again, that he deserves it. You can tell the way he's talking to Kate, because he doesn't blame Kate. He says, it's my fault because I asked her to stay because I didn't want to be alone. But he also, you can tell it's like bigger than that. He feels like it's his fault just because it's him and his existence, and he's not meant to have anything good, which is very similar to Kate. In Kate's video, I spoke about Kate believing that she's not meant to have anything good either. And Kate has a very strong emotional reaction to Sawyer when he says that. It's so sad. It also kind of sets him back in terms of the trust that he's built with certain other characters, particularly Jack actually at one point, you know, the submarine situation. That's a really, I mean, that whole episode is crazy and so tense, but there's this tense moment where Jack's like, I need you to trust me. And of course, the last time he said that to Sawyer, Juliet died. So he goes, sorry, I don't. And then it's all quite tragic. So I feel like Sawyer's belief systems is completely shaken throughout season 6, which is very frustrating actually, because I don't think Sawyer deserves that. I think with everything he's been through, it's a shame that he didn't have like, I don't know, like solid footing, but because of everything that happens, his whole world again is not fully crumbled, but it's definitely rocky and he doesn't know what to believe anymore. So that's probably a downside of season 6, is it kind of knocks things back a bit. And of course then his story ends with getting off the island. He thanks Jack for everything. He saves Claire, he helps Kate save Claire. He, you know, is the Sawyer that we love. He's heroic, he contributes, he is part of that team at the end, and you know, at this point he's somewhat recovering in terms of what happens at the beginning of the season. And yeah, we see him get on the plane and leave the island. So that's where we leave Sawyer in terms of the island story. And I'd love to know what happens next, but of course we don't find out. We don't know what happens to Sawyer afterwards. Does he get with Kate? That's, you know, widely speculated. What job does he get? What does he then do with his life? And I'd love to know that with Sawyer in particular, because we never see him off the island, except for the Flashsideways, which I'll talk about in a moment, but we never see him rescued. So we don't know how he adjusts to leaving that life that he had before, not being a con man anymore. So yeah, I'd love to know what people think in the comments of what you think Sawyer did with his life after being rescued, because I'd love to know. Maybe it was what the Flashsideways implied, which is becoming a police officer. So, I mean, I don't think he'd be able to with his record, but yeah, it might be something along those lines, like helping people, basically. Just want to touch on the Flashsideways and talk about how I loved the path that they picked for Sawyer with this, because it's basically like the alternative of what could have been. It's kind of like when we go through something like that, we tend to fall into either wanting revenge or justice. That's obviously very black and white. There are grey, you know, within all of that. And the Sawyer that we know and love definitely falls into the revenge pathway, as we have spoken about. But this Sawyer goes down more of, he's not perfect or anything like that, but it's more the justice route. It's more like, I need to find this guy, I need to catch him, and I guess helping people at the same time as a police officer. So it's not like complete 180 and he's just this like perfect police officer, not at all. We see that he's definitely still Sawyer in the Flashsideways, but I just think it's interesting that it's pretty much an alternative route with less self-hatred as well, or a bit less self-hatred, because he doesn't completely embody the person he's chasing. He's more actively chasing them as a police officer, which is just really interesting. So we're getting near the end now. I just want to summarise the key relationships that I would expect for Sawyer to talk about in therapy then. So definitely in terms of flashbacks, his parents, 100%. Definitely Mr Sawyer. Definitely maybe whoever he ended up staying with as a child. Definitely Cassidy and Clementine. Definitely in terms of on-island people, Kate. 100% Kate would be spoke about a lot, because there is such a relatability there and a care there, obviously. Definitely Jack. Jack is kind of like a mirror for Sawyer. I mean, they obviously clash in so many ways. They're in a love triangle together. There's a power struggle there. There's lots of reasons why they can't stand each other. But I think another reason why Sawyer doesn't like Jack is that he's kind of like holding up a mirror to Sawyer all the time, because Jack, and there's so much jealousy that Sawyer constantly is like, oh, you're the hero, sorry that I'm not as good, or, you know, I don't think that's a direct quote to be fair, but he's always kind of making fun of Jack for being a good person. That's because there's part of you that wants to be that. You want to be the leader, you want people to care about you, you want people to respect you as well. You want Kate to look at you in the same way that she looks at Jack, but it's not happening, and so he's quite bitter towards Jack as well. Before people start coming for me, this is not me saying that Jack is some innocent thing. Trust me, I spoke a lot about Jack in the Jack video. I'm just purely talking about Sawyer's perspective and the reasons why he doesn't like Jack. But they also have a bond, and he even says to him in season 2, you're the closest thing that I have to a friend. There's like a connection there, because he's kind of fully himself with Jack. Like with everyone else, he like doesn't know where he fits or like how to act, so he's kind of just fundamentally rude. There's a massive disconnect. Him and Jack have a back and forth, and that back and forth alone is more of a relationship than Sawyer is used to having. So it's like a dynamic, a connection, like basically. It's not the strongest connection, but it's certainly a connection. And I do think he respects Jack deep down. He just didn't want to admit it for a really long time, but then we see him admit it later on. We would definitely want to talk about his friends that he's making, and I would definitely want to put a spotlight on friendships, because that would be important for him, I think. Hurley being a massive one. Love his friendship with Hurley. There's this really funny moment where he's like, you conned me into being decent. That's the lamest con ever. Hurley just kind of really sees something in Sawyer and encourages that part of him that is good. And I think Sawyer rejects it at first, but then like leans into it and is comfortable with Hurley as well. And like, I don't know, you can tell he just cares about Hurley. Jin as well, it's a genuine friendship with Jin. They go through a lot with the raft. Maybe because Jin doesn't speak English as well, there's kind of like, I don't know, there's like a simplistic communication between the two of them that probably helps Sawyer more able to bond. As I said with Jack, even just their back and forth and arguing is like a connection for him. So it's very hard for Sawyer to connect in a proper way like other people are. So having someone like Jin where it's, I don't know, you're just kind of teaching English words, having a laugh, it's not too serious, but they've also got a lot of history and they've been through a lot. It's like a proper bond there as well, which is really lovely. Obviously, he talked about Juliet and his love for her, their relationship, probably speak a lot about how Juliet helped him evolve as a person, give him the life that he has always really wanted deep down, and obviously speak about his grief as well, because unfortunately, you know, she did pass away, so there would be a lot of grief to unpack in therapy as well. There might be also Michael and Walt mentioned, just because I do think that there was a bond there with Michael, there was a friendship there, and there's kind of grief with Michael because of what happened. Michael obviously betraying everybody and kind of turning on everyone, but Sawyer's never over it. One of my favourite Sawyer moments actually that I've not mentioned yet is in season 3, when again, he does commit murder, but he says this is for taking the kid off the raft. And I love that because not only is it a callback to season 1, but it really shows the nature of how Sawyer works, that he was never over it. He was never over what they did. And yes, that, you know, is very Sawyer in that he's got a thing for revenge. He's not very good at letting go, but it also does speak to his care as well. And the fact that he found that just as traumatizing as everybody else, the fact that that kid got taken. So that's quite a significant thing that might come up in therapy as well. So how would I as a therapist help Sawyer then? Definitely process trauma, definitely process grief of his parents, definitely really deal heads on with what happened to him, obviously in a gentle way, step by step. Look at other ways to handle what's happened to him other than this path of revenge. That would be key. Definitely building that relationship with himself, working on his self-hatred, his reckless behavior, his self-loathing, his identity. Why has he decided to be immersed in this world, become the man that he's chasing? Who is he really? Like, who is the real James? Why does he want to die as well? What is it about life that he finds so hard? Is there another way? What would he like to see for himself, or what did he used to like to see for himself? Like, did he have any dreams growing up of what he wanted to be? This revenge took over everything, so he'd be trying to get back to his original thoughts and feelings and desires and wants out of life. Maybe exploring what revenge would actually do for him, like really going there of like, are you sure this is going to be what you think it's going to be? Like really almost like playing it out as a scenario, like, okay, well then what's next? Once you've finally done it, what is next for you? Because I don't think he'd realise that based on what we saw in the island. I don't think he ever thought past finding Mr Sawyer, again, in a gentle way, really trying to get him to think beyond that and finding him and acting on his revenge, and also exploring what love could do for him. Obviously, we're lucky enough to see that on the show with Julia and what happens in season 5, but in therapy, exploring what that could bring into his life, because he rejects it so much. He rejects anyone that ever cares about him, as I've spoken about. So actually getting in touch with what good that might bring for him, what he could potentially gain from that, and really kind of opening his eyes to new possibilities. And then the final question I want to answer then is, how does Sawyer change overall? So a bit of a summary then on Sawyer's character development without therapy. So they're the things that I would work on, but Sawyer does a lot of evolving throughout the show. He cares for himself so much more. He cares for others so much more. There's this really great line in season 6 where he says, you don't get to die alone. I think it's season 6, could be wrong about that, but he says it to somebody, and it's like, for him to say that of like, fine, I'll go with you because you don't get to die alone. Like, he cares for other people so much more than he ever did, as well as himself, obviously. You know, he saves Claire as well. He really helps other people. He saves people's lives, and overall he sees himself worthy of love and worthy of being a leader in life, and that is probably the most significant change that happens to Sawyer. So that was incredibly long. So if you got to this point, thank you so much. They are all my therapeutic thoughts and breakdown about the character James Ford / Sawyer. If you enjoyed this video, as I said, please like and subscribe for more videos as well, because we'll be doing the rest of the lost characters. But I also do reaction videos, vlogs. I talk about how to improve your self-esteem, how to do other things to improve your mental health. So lots of different content on this channel. So please subscribe if you're interested in any of that. Give me a follow on Instagram as well. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. I've really enjoyed rambling on and on and on about one of my favorite TV characters of all time. So yeah, thank you so much for listening and take care. Bye.